Welcome to Community of Cultures CoC Live. We've got an early one today because I'm speaking to someone all the way over in Australia. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about the postnatal confinement period, so the 40 days postpartum. And Sam Chua, I hope I've said that correctly, is joining us. I actually think that she's there, and let's see if I can add her in.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, very good. Good day from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for the introduction. Now, please excuse for my coughing. I'm still recovering from a particularly nasty bout of flu. And
Oh
that's something that
no.
nobody tells you when you have a child is that you're bound to catch every single bug that they get from daycare.
Yeah.
Yep.
My daughter's just started. She started in January, and the first 5 months has just been of
Oh,
absolute illness every week. So I completely understand.
exactly.
Um, Thank you so much for joining. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction to what Community of Cultures is for those who haven't joined us before. So Community of Cultures is a UK-based project, and our parent organisation is Sheffield Maternity Cooperative. But we're a national project, and what we do is we offer support to people from Black communities, Asian communities, and ethnic communities for the reproductive journey. And we try to help in that way to tackle the inequalities in maternal health care. So what we do, we offer one-to-one support and advocacy. We do virtual spaces on Zoom with specialists, which are free to attend. And we do a lot of things like this, raising awareness about different topics and different cultures that are present on the reproductive journey. So yeah, that's what we do. And today I've chosen to cover this really important topic that I don't think is talked about enough. I don't think there's much of a much knowledge around it, actually. The 40-day postpartum period, that in some cultures is quite a tradition. And I am so delighted that I've got such a fabulous guest all the way over in Australia. So this is amazing, the modern technology that's allowed for this to happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hand over to Sam just to introduce yourself and tell us how you're feeling this evening.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Emery. I'm beyond honored to be invited to be on CoC Live to share my experience as a first generation migrant and spread a word about self care in motherhood, particularly that 40 days postnatal. But first of all, CoC, what a fantastic organization championing the voice and right of birthing for people of color in the UK. Fantastic. What a great organization. Before we begin, I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm speaking to you from today. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which each of you are living, learning, and working from today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are here today. So back to Amrit's question. I was born in Singapore, raised in Malaysia in a pretty traditional Chinese community and family before moving and settling in Melbourne, Australia about 12 years ago. So up until 2021, I was working in the communications and marketing sector for a not-for-profit healthcare organization with a really strong focus on maternal health care and medical research. I'm also a mother to a cheeky, almost 3-year-old boy, and I live in suburban Melbourne with my husband and my little boy. That's a bit about myself.
Thank you so much. And how are you feeling? Like, what energy are you bringing to this chat today?
Oh, I'm just bringing a lot of gratitude and also a really generous spirit to just to share my experience. I'm not coming from a health expert point of view, but simply being sort of comparing that experience of being a person of color living in Melbourne, Australia. So that's sort of that energy that I'm bringing tonight.
Thank you so much. So what we're gonna do, we're just gonna go through some questions and some talking points and just see how the discussion flows. So, tell us about your postnatal experience. So your 30 to 40 day postnatal confinement period and what it typically involved for you.
So back in 2019, when I was pregnant, I had gestational diabetes, which is very common for people of Asian descent. And I was diagnosed with mild preeclampsia at 38 weeks. So I was induced almost immediately at 38.5 weeks and gave birth to my baby boy. I was discharged from the hospital just barely 24 hours later, but readmitted I think another 48 hours later due to fluctuating blood pressure and also because my baby had jaundice. So back to postnatal confinement, it typically refers to a traditional practice following childbirth, which is a seclusion and recovery period for women, and it goes on for between 30 to 40 days. And in some cultures, this can even be up to 100 days. Now, this is a sort of tradition that goes back thousands of years. There's an ancient tradition whereby typically enforced rest is prescribed. And there are lots of sort of taboos and rituals around that time, such as no drinking ice water or anything cold, eating certain herbs and food, or not eating certain herbs and food. And I had my baby late 2019, just before COVID hit. So I was incredibly fortunate to have my mother visiting me from Malaysia to help me during this transition. During that sort of 30 days or that in that sort of hazy, heady newborn days, one experience that really stood out for me was the tradition of limiting visitors and extended visits during that time. This was well-intentioned to ensure that mothers get enough rest and to prevent vulnerable infants from catching various infections and diseases that's going on. My husband is Greek Australian, so this was not quite well understood by in-laws. There was a bit of a territorial rivalry, which definitely caused some grief. There were lots of tears during that time, mostly from me, which again was a big no-no because one of the rules of postnatal confinement was that mums should not cry lest her eyesight deteriorates. Now, I don't know how true this is, but till this day, my mother would remind me about this incident whenever I tell her, oh, I think my eyesight's going. It's not as good as it used to be.
That is so interesting. So you mean that you shouldn't cry during that time?
Yes, so it's a little bit of a taboo, which I don't know whether there's any scientific logic behind it, but the intention was that, a new mom shouldn't be stressing themselves or shouldn't be in distress. It should be a calming time for bonding and recovery, really. Yeah.
It's so interesting when you think about that in relation to mental health after you've had a baby and how different cultures approach mental health, and when you've got something like that which is signified as a taboo, it kind of I guess it would add to someone's whether they feel open enough to talk about their mental health or feel reluctant to as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very interesting thing where it presents itself as a taboo, but the meaning behind it, if you look behind it, it's actually quite well intentioned.
Yeah. Thank you. So obviously you've grown up in Australia and you have a Chinese Asian background. So have you experienced any sort of conflict between the Asian culture and your upbringing and the Western and mainstream medicine and care when it comes to postnatal period?
Definitely. So I didn't grow up in Australia. I grew up in Malaysia. So my entire socialization period has been sort of deeply immersed in that Asian culture. It was only back in 2009 that I moved to Melbourne as a young adult. So in Malaysia, there are retreat centres within the community for new mums to be admitted to observe postnatal confinement. So this happens after they're discharged from the hospital. So go from hospital straight to these retreat centres. So in these centres, mums are catered for with you get your own room, you get lots of rest, nutritious meals throughout the day, and there are nurses and midwives, sometimes even doctors on duty as well to look after the baby. I do believe these rituals allow mothers to be mothered for a period of time after the birth. It can get pretty expensive, but even if these are not an affordable option for some women, it is always assumed that organized help and support will be available, such as having family members, usually mums, aunties, sisters, or grandmothers, who would be available on hand to provide support to new mother after what is, arguably be one of the biggest transition in a woman's life. I think the practice of seclusion also allows the mother to recuperate and also having that time to bond with the newborn. It may also have beneficial health effects as well as facilitate the transition into motherhood. So by contrast, I found that the postnatal care in modern Western medicine typically focus on infant care, and maternal care often does not go beyond the first few days or beyond a week or two after the woman gives birth. Of course, I can only speak from my own maternity experience in the public health system here in Australia. But here are some of the few instances after I gave birth that really magnify that paradigm differences between Eastern and Western medicine. So right after I gave birth, for example, I remember the midwife, I was still on a gurney or it's pretty much the stirrups hasn't really been taken off me, that the midwife encouraged me to walk off the delivery table bare feet and to head into the shower to wash off all the vernix and blood and just to get clean. My mum, who was in the delivery room with me, she was mortified. She literally gave me a look that I think all of you will be familiar with, which just says, "Don't you dare." As a dutiful daughter, of course, I blush, but I don't think I got a proper wash until about 2 days later, and I didn't get a chance to wash my hair for about close to a week, because there's this tradition of only using warm water with a special herb concoction, which had to be delivered, and someone had to really prepare it for me. But outside of that, I remember when I had the maternal child health nurse to do a home visit, she was also quite uncomfortable with all the herbal stew that's cooking away in the kitchen. And the fact that I left my baby in the care of my mum and my live-in postpartum doula. But instead of explaining it to her with pride that this is a culture and some customs that I observed, I remember feeling a bit of guilt and shame, which until this day, I still can't quite reconcile what that was. So it's a very interesting one. But also when it comes to paid work or professional work, I remember when I miscarried on my 30th birthday, my mum called and say, "Oh, you still have to rest and recover. It's still quite traumatic on you, on your body. So take that time to recuperate." But I went back to work just 12 hours later, simply because I didn't know what to say to my employer.
Yeah.
And even though I was grieving and I was going through a level of discomfort and pain, I just took painkillers and just got on with it because I just don't know what to say. So all that sort of combined experience made me think about how our really mainstream technocentric culture really sort of encourages mum to, or promotes for mum to bounce back after birth, get on with it, but forgetting that the birthing experience takes a huge toll physically and mentally as well. And it really seems that the advance of medical technology now is promoting that band-aid or quick fix rather than taking that time for women to sort of heal properly and rest properly.
Yeah, because it is such a big transition. It's such a big time in someone's life, and you've often gone through, such a big event, like physically as well as mentally. I know that I've spoken to people over here who feel like things are very much centered around that whole bounce back, or even, well, in the UK, there are even people who have to go out and take their baby out to get weighed at clinics, or, go to clinics, go to places postpartum to have appointments. And that doesn't allow for observing these sort of traditions and cultures. And it's interesting about you weren't sure what to say to your employer, because I guess it sits outside of the Eurocentric norm of what's expected, and it can make you feel awkward. I'm really sorry to hear about your miscarriage. I've also gone through a loss myself as well, and we've spoken about loss on CoC Live as well. But it's also interesting that you say you needed that rest period, the similar kind of postnatal period after that miscarriage too, because that is also your you were pregnant and you are going through that same sort of journey. So yeah, it's really interesting that you said that, to observe that as well. Do you feel like there's enough information out there about the postnatal confinement period, and how do you think that we can raise more awareness about this tradition?
It's a very interesting question, Enrique. Now, I need to preface this by saying that it's definitely not meant as a criticism towards the care that I have received in the public health system, particularly having an insider perspective into maternal care through the public health system through my work. Even pre-COVID days, I could see the passion and the hard work that all the care staff had towards the work and the pride that they have. And the level of care that I received was fantastic. And things are definitely improving, and there's so many private doulas for hire, and midwives were sort of more educated in a more diverse way of model of care. But I do find that through talking with women in the local community, through talking with friends and family, things can always be improved. And oftentimes it is the first generation migrants, the ones who are facing that social and language barrier, who are new to a Eurocentric culture, who need that sort of familiar traditions to support and ground them during this big transition. At the individual healthcare provider level, I think we can definitely benefit from an increased awareness of and knowledge of about these practices, simply to avoid causing undue distress to the women receiving care. So, for example, new mothers may feel uneasy about drinking ice water, having a cold shower, or other routine hospital practices so soon after giving birth, but she may feel compelled to comply simply because of the power dynamics that's at play in the hospital between a healthcare provider and that patient relationship. So similarly, they may also feel uncomfortable with male staff due to cultural beliefs regarding modesty or potential concerns just regarding contamination. However, that choice for alternative care in that sort of mainstream medical setting is not always present for these women to have their own voice. So I think physicians, nurses, and other allied healthcare professionals, it will be great for them to have an open dialogue with their patients, either during that point of antenatal care or upon triage and admission in the hospital, about their wishes regarding postpartum practices. From then on, negotiate a mutually agreeable care plan. This may extend beyond the hospital stay as well. And depending on the patient's preferences, this may include involvement of family members if possible, as these family members may have been given authority or certain prescribed roles in the postpartum care of that particular woman. Looking at mental health, for those in need of mental health care due to psychopathologies, there should be an exploration of issues related to postpartum practices. So there can be a number of factors leading to individual preferences in adhering to these traditional practices. But some women who identify as a particular cultural background, they may find that traditions are really stifling, and that's completely fine. But I think the point is that it's very important to acknowledge the dynamic nature of these practices, because they're also influenced by modern day factors such as modernization, globalization, and immigration. So an open dialogue rather than jumping into conclusion and making assumptions, I feel, is really essential for postpartum care or arranging appropriate postpartum care.
Yeah, it's all about making the plan with that person, isn't it? And personalized care, and as you say, not jump into assumptions, which happens also often, I think. So I know that you obviously took your learning from your postnatal period and about postnatal confinement, and you created a business to help others. So please talk to us about that as well, and what made you do that, and what does that involve?
Yes, I always say Moon Mama is my third baby. So the first being my dog Luna, followed by my son Stefan. Moon Mama essentially is a gifting and postpartum essentials online shop. So all the products on the shop are catered towards self-care for mums rather than the infant. The idea for Moon Mama came to me when I was unwrapping all my gifts from my baby shower, and I realized that only my closest girlfriends and my sister had bothered to gift me some breastfeeding essentials. And the one that really stood out for me was a silicone breast pump or milk catcher. And guess what I reach out for the most during those heady, dizzying days of new motherhood, when there's also so many unexpected things happening. It was the breast pump or milk catcher. So having experienced the conflict between the Eastern and Western medical maternal care, I sort of took that philosophy and founded Moon Mama to promote self-care among mums, because I learned from first-hand experience that we just can't simply pour from an empty cup, and the babies need us to be well before we can care for them.
Yeah.
So it has been a year since I founded Moon Mama, and I've had the privilege to read so many messages from people from all walks of life, colleagues, husbands, sisters, mothers, mother-in-laws, sending messages and gifts of healing and self-care to the new mums in their life. I've also had women who buy these products for themselves, which is really, really encouraging to see. And it further solidifies the need for health practitioners to be more inclusive in their standards of care, particularly when the world was collectively and still is going through a pandemic with various lockdowns. Our already fragile village and the people around us and our support system just vanished like that because of lockdown. It can be very isolating in new motherhood. This pandemic has taken such a big toll on all of us, and it's so important now that we recognize the importance of self-care and how our physical wellness can improve our mental health.
Thank you. It's interesting you talk about the pandemic, because I was thinking, how do you think the pandemic has impacted on these practices and these traditions?
Definitely. So just learning from first-hand experience from friends and family around me who have had baby during this time, with these visiting rules that as we've all gone through,
Yeah.
Mums are just simply doing it on their own, and the only sort of good thing about living in the 21st century is technology. So video calls and online deliveries. There are lots of businesses that pop up to support mums with food deliveries and online courses and stuff. It's very, very tough. Nothing replaces human connection, but we had technology to help us through that, and something's better than nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I know that so I had a baby during COVID in 2020.
Yeah.
And I guess the good thing about not having the visitors, I mean, my husband was on furlough at the time as well, so over here we people were essentially paid to stay at home because we
Yeah.
couldn't go into the office. So that was helpful. But yeah, I guess the good thing about not having so many visitors for me was I was able to just sit and focus on feeding and focus
Yeah.
on resting, I guess.
Yeah.
Whereas I think other times I probably would have had to get up and greet guests and be accommodating and things like that. So in that respect, I guess that's good for this sort of tradition of the postnatal healing. But it was hard and lonely without people around. And they say it takes a village to raise a child, but when you don't have that village around because of the restrictions, that was difficult.
Yeah, 100%. I do agree that because during that early stages of the pandemic, I was still feeding as well, and when it was just my husband and I and baby at home, it was definitely easier because nobody could visit. So it was just me, baby, and we just bonded. Some of my other friends who really wanted to observe the practices but couldn't have that sort of mums and grandmas around to help them, literally did a simplified version of it, which is just to observe the simple stuff, which is basic, to get basic catering to cater to their herbs and food needs, and get their husband to be on hand to help them. And we all got through it. So
yeah.
Thank
you so much. I don't know if we've got any questions. Did you have any questions sent to you before the chat?
No, not really, actually. It was basically a lot of people are quite interested. The only question I got was what is postnatal confinement, which we've already explained and covered in quite some details as well. Look, I'm happy to take any questions, or if anyone has any questions after the fact, feel free to send Read to myself a question, your question on our respective Instagram pages. Mine is @MoonMamaAU. or feel free to email me at hello@moonmama.co. I do think that mothers and parents in general we're the ones raising the next generation of policymakers and doctors and engineers. And we all know that the first 1,000 days of a person's life is critical for their lifelong development and well-being. Therefore, the better off a mother is physically and mentally, the better off our society will be. And it really starts from the moment those two little lines appear on the pregnancy tests.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I haven't come across any questions in our chat, so what I think I will do, I'm obviously going to save this video once we're finished. I'll put your handle in the description and a call out for questions in our Instagram stories. If anyone has any questions at all about the postnatal confinement period, or to Sam about your experience as well, please just drop us the when I put the box through on the stories. But thank you so much for joining us, and it's so interesting. Something, as I said, it's not common knowledge, I guess, to everyone about these practices. So it's so important that we talk about them and normalize a discussion around them, I guess. So thank you
so much. It's my pleasure, my privilege to connect with you all tonight. Look after yourself.
Yeah, you too. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.